already had a fight?
It's an appropriate night to do marriage. So. I don't have a prayer.
Oh, okay.
You get to do one off the top of your head.
So part of what happens when you're married is your spouse puts you on the spot, just like right now, right? So we're going to go ahead and do an opening prayer. All right, I am trying to pass the buck. Okay. All right, so everyone, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
God, we have such gratitude that we're here today, that we're able to learn and that we're able to share with one another and share food and share our thoughts and just be with one another and be in the present moment. Just be with everyone here, fill them with your Holy Spirit, fill them with life, and help them to fully give themselves to you during this Lenten season. Just bless us, guide us, and give us peace. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen. So we're going to talk about marriage tonight, and really primarily sacramental marriage. What makes a marriage sacramental as opposed to non-sacramental marriages, right? So what does the church consider a marriage? And we're going to look at that and talk about what each spouse brings to the other, right?
Right.
So Farrell had a really cool slide. I somehow messed it up. And now it's not doing anything. So like when this flower opens up, then a bunch of cool words come underneath it and talk about marriage. Except they don't do that anymore.
Well, tell us, though, when you were putting this slide together with the flower, tell us what you were thinking when you put the flower together.
Well, you put the slide together with the flower. But it was really beautiful because it talked about how, you come together and then you bloom together and you grow and you flourish and you're fruitful. And so you start with this seed almost in the bud, and then as it opens, it's the plant being fruitful, the flower being fruitful to be pollinated and produce seeds and carry on.
Yeah, this is a very interesting picture too. And we're not going to talk about art, but in the middle are the stamens, which are the actual male part of the flower. And then, as you can see, the flower, the most beautiful part of the flower, encompasses the male part of the flower. So,
Why won't our slideshow go forward? Start slideshow. Boom. See?
is it just not advancing? It's in a PDF.
It's in a PDF, not so PowerPoint.
It's moving forward.
Well, it's
Got Deuteronomy and so on.
oh, see?
Well, we can have my computer up if you want.
Your computer will run better than this one.
Are you trying to just get to the next slide?
Yeah.
It's just not advancing.
What were you looking at?
Yeah, let's see if this.
See that?
Well,
Step by step.
I think you just have to download it. I think it's coming up.
hang on. Just
There you go. You got it. And part of what a spouse does is offer that support.
Oh.
Like, you got this. You got this.
There's the
Perilous words.
Yeah. Read it, because it's kind of small. Please.
It says Genesis 1 in the beginning,
Slideshow.
God created mankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. Say okay. Oh.
Ow.
Is this all the plans? Marriage is really like.
No, this is like.
On how a couple works together. Yeah, this is.
Yeah, this is a script. That's right, Father Brandon. This is a script.
This is the
Yeah, there's nowhere to cancel on the computer itself.
Oh,
Can you come help?
it's behind it's behind the PowerPoint software. You got to exit out of PowerPoint. It'll be on the desktop.
And so sometimes when there's trouble in a marriage, guess who they call? Their father.
I'm not the only one that has this kind of problem.
Is it up on your computer?
I bet this is going to work.
We can all say a prayer for technology.
I got online deal was like 67% better than the 5
Okay.
Yay.
My dad said
Okay, now we're going to guess. Okay. So, God created mankind in his image. God created them male and female. And that's so important because the image of God is fully contained in the male and female image that complement one another. So if we look back at depending on if you want to go by chronology or order in the Bible, the first creation story, which is the second creation story in your Bible, Adam meets all of creation, and he's still got a boy. And that's when God creates woman out of the side of man. And that's another important point when we think about this creation story. Woman didn't come out of man's head, where she'd be over him, nor out of his heel, where he'd be over her, but out of his side, where they're equals together in this relationship that God created them for, and that's the relationship of marriage. So, it's kind of a weird start, but we're going to start with talking about our relationship with God as individuals. And that's because that's really going to be the center of the marriage and what the marriage is forged around and grows into. And this idea that God is love, and we're called to love God with all our being. And that's what we're called to. And to know that God is love. It's really important because we're going to talk about the Trinity and how marriage shadows the Trinity, right? It's the love between the husband and the wife, and it's to be fruitful as God is fruitful. And so when we think of marriage, we first have to think that each of our love for God is what we're built on, and then how does that come together?
Well, the great Greek philosopher Aristotle spoke of the Transcendent Third. Here's what he meant. He meant that a friendship will endure only in the measure that the two friends fall in love, not so much with each other, but together with a Transcendent Third, with some good that lies beyond the two of them. So think of two friends who together love their country, who together love the truth, who together love beauty. And maybe it's films or books or whatever it is. But they move out of simply a shared egotism. Because Aristotle said that's what a friendship will devolve into unless some transcendent good pulls the friends outside of themselves. And the irony is, the paradox is, it's that transcendent third kind of friendship that will actually last. If the two friends or two lovers, let's say, simply fall in love with each other, in time that relationship will devolve. I think that's one of the keenest insights in the history of philosophy when it comes to friendship and to relationship. Can I suggest that the Catholic liturgy senses much the same thing when it has us pray, "Glory to God in the highest, and peace to his people on earth." That's a formula, if you want, for joy, for peace, for success. When God is given glory in the highest, then peace obtains among us. When together we fall in love with a transcendent good, namely the good of God, then we tend to have peaceful relationships. The trouble again is, if we're simply trying to establish relationships among ourselves, they will tend to devolve into bickering and ultimately into division, warfare. Glory to God in the highest, then peace will break out among us. Now, I want to bring this down to earth a bit now, from Aristotle and the liturgy to something very pragmatic. Years ago, when I was doing full-time parish work, I'd work with engaged couples. So young people would come to the parish, and they were preparing for marriage in the Catholic Church. So I get to know them, we chat and so on, and then we move into more serious conversation. I would ask them eventually some version of, why do you two want to get married in church? So you get married in front of the Justice of the Peace, you get married in a civil context. But why do you want specifically to be married in the Catholic Church? Well, they would kind of hem and haw and give different answers, but usually they come up with some version of, well, because we love each other. I would smile, typically, and I would say, well, that's great. I'm delighted you love each other. But that's not a good reason to get married in the Catholic Church. I mean, if you love each other, you could announce that before the judge. You could celebrate that out in the forest. I mean, that's a good thing, but it's not a good enough reason to be married in the Catholic Church. And they sort of can be puzzled. And I would invoke this very principle. Say, To get married in the Catholic Church, that's to say before God, what you're saying is, we've discerned that together we are in love with God. And we've discerned that God, for his purposes, has drawn us together. It's not just the two of us met, the two of us like each other, the two of us fell in love. It's something stranger, more mysterious than that. It's that God has, for his purposes, drawn us together so that we might find our salvation in each other's presence, and that together we might fulfill a common mission. When you have discerned that, I would say, then you're ready to stand at the altar before God and his people and say, Lord, we're being married in your presence. That's falling in love with a transcendent third now in the fullest sense. Now, this is why Fulton J. Sheen, many years ago, wrote a book called Three to Get Married. And it's the same idea. I mean, he knew Aristotle, too. It's not just the two people. That's not enough. Not just husband and wife who love each other. There has to be a third involved, namely God. Together we fall in love with God. Together we've surrendered to God's purposes. Now we're ready for a Christian marriage. Now just, broaden that out. All the ways now that we seek, relationship, we seek friendship. Always keep this Aristotelian principle in mind. And I think you'll walk a much happier path. If we're simply looking for love, period, that won't be enough. You'll be looking for love in all the wrong places. What you should be looking for is God's will, God's purpose. And then find somebody who is as in love with that purpose as you are. Now you've found someone to love.
So, the idea of a sacramental marriage is that it's a Christ-centered marriage. It's each of you building the other one up in their faith and caring about the other's faith. It's that gift of self to the other that's full and complete. And the Book of Tobit, and I know if you come from a different tradition, it's not one that you're familiar with, but it's a beautiful story. If you just want to read, just a beautiful story, read the story of Tobit. And it's romantic, it's tragic, it's beautiful. It's right up there, great literature in the Bible with 1st and 2nd Samuel. It's just great literature by itself. But so Tobit's been through all of this, and he's talking to God. And can you read?
On number 6?
Yeah, read them.
You did? Okay. You made Adam, and you made his wife Eve to be his helper and support. And from these two the human race has come. You said it is not good for the man to be alone. Let us make him a helper like himself. Now, not with lust, but with fidelity, I take this kinswoman as my wife. Send down your mercy on me and on her, and grant that we may grow old together. Bless us with children.
And that's really kind of the formula of the marriage, right? That we're to be helpers to one another. But I think that this passage, these 4 lines kind of accentuate what Bishop Barron was saying. If I look at my wife as pleasure for myself, something to please me that makes me happy, I mean, that's good.
That's good, yeah. That would be good.
Hope that we both do that. But if that's my purpose for my wife, I'm approaching her with a form of lust.
It's like objectification.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that. But it's a lust. It's self-fulfillment, right? Not fidelity. Fidelity is giving myself to Farrella, trusting in turn that she's giving herself to me. So I don't have to worry about me. I can worry about her. And, you know, and then just the beauty of, and bless us with children. Bless this union. Let it be fruitful. We'll talk about different ways that we're fruitful. This one's you.
So the Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches us that God is love, and in himself he lives a mystery of personal, loving communion, creating the human race in his own image. God inscribed in the humanity of man and woman the vocation, and thus the capacity and responsibility of love and communion. So oftentimes we don't think of marriage as a vocation. We think of our work as a vocation. Sometimes the priests have a vocation. Consecrated women have a vocation. So you get my meaning. But marriage is actually a vocation. So what does that mean to you? When you think of vocation, what is it that comes to your mind? And this is open floor.
Like
A career, okay. Like your job, right? Vocation, yes. More Norman Votek, yeah.
A lifelong decision.
A lifelong decision. That's really well put. It is, and so when we view marriage as a vocation, it takes on a different meaning. It's not just a job, an 8-to-5 job that you can go home and forget about it, right? It's something that you live every single day.
And where does marriage fall in our various vocations?
And sometimes communication happens, like a lack of communication. So tell us more about what you're trying to say.
Well, I was asking you. So, like, I have to go to work every day.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's a vocation.
Yeah.
And I'm studying for the diaconate, and we're walking through that together. That's a vocation.
Mm-hmm.
So, work, diaconate, marriage?
Oh, yeah, no, I get what you're saying. So no. Actually, let's see. Let's put this in order. Our kids, marriage, and then church? You don't think so? Huh. I'm never right. He's always right. I'm always wrong, right? Let me see. I should put you first, then God, then the kids.
I think you're right.
No! Father Brandon, really?
So the vocation of marriage is a sacrament. It's instituted by Christ, and it's the coming together where the two become one. So when you become married, your primary vocation isn't to anything other than your spouse, and you getting your spouse to heaven, her or he, depends on which one's talking, getting you to heaven, right? So it's working together, but that is your primary vocation. You can't let work interfere with it. You can't let things at the church interfere with it.
Can't let God interfere with it.
God would never interfere with the sacrament. He makes it possible.
So you're telling me that in this whole vocation thing in the hierarchy that actually God should be first.
Of course.
Then your spouse.
Yes.
Then everything else.
Then
Then your kids, your
everything
family, and then everything else.
I think we've got it.
I think you got it. By Joe.
So there's another thing about marriage, and I don't know if anybody's a Lord of the Rings fan, but I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. And when Gimli tries to sever the ring, he pays a pretty big price, right? And so when we look at the catechism, it forms an intimate partnership of life and love established by God and governed by God's laws. And so I don't know how to make that quit going off. I'm sorry. And the two aren't individual anymore. There's some mystical union that takes place and they become one. And Jesus makes it clear, what God brings together, let no man separate. So a Catholic and a sacramental marriage is for life. It's forever. There's not an escape hatch. There's not a way out if it's truly a sacramental marriage. And we'll talk about the elements of one. But we freely enter into it, but we freely enter into a relationship with our spouse and with God. And it's a lifelong commitment.
Okay, so now, who likes to cook? Who likes to bake, more specifically?
I like to.
So, you like to cook, and we have several bakers out there, right? Well, now, we're going to give you the recipe for a sacramental marriage. Oops.
I know.
Yes, squeak again?
No, hang on.
Gotta figure out where to hook it.
Yeah.
Nose?
Yours.
Okay.
She takes my ring out when we come.
I would hope so.
She puts it in when we get in the car.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I like the image of a wedding cake because it has layers, and so does a sacramental marriage. So what you need, so if you want to write this down, we could probably get a handout, but just in case you forget how to.
You can turn it
Do
off
I have
and
to
yell.
have this on?
If you yell, you don't.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, because this is driving me absolutely
They won't,
crazy.
they will hear you online, but.
I think it's because you're standing under the speaker. Try to move away from the speaker.
Okay, is this better?
Also, the volume needs to be turned down. So.
If,
Don't
Get
stand under the
feedback
speaker.
from the system.
No. Stand, yes, right there. The speakers are the round things in the ceiling, so don't stand under them.
oh gosh, okay, I feel so constrained. Okay. Okay, I don't think it turns down on this thing. It only turns down over there, right?
Yeah, over there.
Okay.
So you want me to turn it down?
I think Father Brandon has it.
Oh.
It's just kind of unpleasant. Okay, so the recipe for a sacramental marriage is 1 complete box of fully, 1 overflowing cup of freely, 1 package of pure fruit faithful, and 1 whole fruitful. So keeping in mind that there's no imitation ingredients, there's no substitutions, and absolutely no fillers when you're talking about a sacramental marriage. So let's talk about one complete box of fully.
So, fully, and we look to Christ as our model in life, right? And when Christ came, he gave himself fully to us. Fully to the extent that he became man, he died, but he gave himself fully. He didn't withhold anything from us. And we're called to that same fully giving in marriage. When you give yourself in marriage, you don't get to go, I'm going to give you 7/8, but I'm saving an 8th for Judy. It's fully, it's everything that you have. And so you run into this interesting thing in the Catholic Church. Father Brannon, can you have a prenuptial agreement in the Catholic Church?
No, not a prenuptial agreement. No.
Why not?
Because that shows that you have an intention to dissolve the marriage at some point if it becomes difficult.
Yeah, but what if just in case, we just don't like each other? What if just in case we decide, no, we're not doing this. This was a bad idea.
Can't be married in the Catholic Church yet.
Too bad.
And that's really important because in our culture it kind of accentuates a huge difference, right? Marriage isn't contingent on Farrella making me happy. That's not part of the deal. I don't get to go, you didn't make me happy last night. I've given myself fully. Everything that I have, I've given to her. And it's an irrevocable gift. Now, that's why you want to be careful entering a marriage, right? Because you want somebody that's going to reciprocate and give fully back to you. But it's a gift that's fully. You're not holding any part of you back from the other.
I remember a conversation I was having with someone from my previous job, and she was a younger person, and younger people are awesome. Younger people are awesome. But she was getting ready to get married, and she was just kind of talking, and she says, "Oh well, probably it'll last about 3 years, because that's typically about the range, and then we'll move on." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, okay."
There's another element to holiness: capacity. You can't enter into a sacramental marriage with a project. Women are better at projects than men.
You mean like you're a project?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna save you, or I'm gonna change you.
You'll fix
Maybe
me.
I'll change you. I'll fix you.
Once you get me fixed. Or if someone's suffering from, serious depression, has other things going on in their life, to where if you don't know who you are yet, right? You're not in a position to fully give yourself because you're not full yet. And so it presumes this health with each couple, that they're in a position to understand that they're fully giving and fully entering. It's a healthy gift. Not, she'll be all right once I get her whipped into shape.
Or not, we can always get a divorce.
Okay, so the next thing is one overflowing cup of freely. So, Christ gave himself freely. He didn't, he wasn't kicking and screaming, right? He didn't like it, but he still gave himself freely. He didn't want to go to the cross, but rather he humbled himself, being obedient to death, even death on a cross. And we do humble ourselves to each other.
And that freely, can you guys think of instances where it wouldn't be where you freely enter into the marriage?
Like if I were pregnant and I was getting a lot of pressure from my parents that if I don't get married, then, well, all things are going to break loose.
So you can have, pressures like that. You can have just an outside pressure from, he's a great guy, you need to marry him. You don't want to let this go.
Look, he's rich.
That's what you thought.
Does anyone else have any ideas of what freely means? Like where would be an instance in where you might not be giving yourself freely to another person?
Arranged marriages.
Arranged marriages, okay, yeah.
Or if you're trying to escape a situation or a household, just to escape it, and that's a way out.
Yes, yeah.
Way out of what you perceive to be a bad situation, and I'm rescued. And again, you'll start to see this overlap, right? Because if I'm escaping my parents' house and I'm going to marry Farrell, I'm not really fully giving myself to her. I'm using her as an escape.
Yeah, and he's
right?
probably marrying his mother, right?
Unfortunately, that's kind of true, but only when we fight. But that freely is really important because that's one of the things that makes it so binding, that it was freely entered into.
Okay, so the next thing that goes into our recipe, into our cake, is one package of pure faithful.
It's a gift, and when we think about using Christ again as our model, he gave himself to us, and his life's eternal. That was an eternal gift that he gave us, because when God's eternal. Now, we're not eternal, but we do have this life, and you're entering into it faithfully for life. So when you do vows, it's until death do us part. And that's the commitment that you're making. And there's not really, even though everybody wants to say, well, if the other spouse does this. And actually the answer is usually, no, that's not a good reason for a divorce. Maybe evidence that something was missing at the front end. But a sacramental marriage is determined at the point of marriage. And so, if somebody steps out on the other one, you're called to forgive as Christ forgives. If somebody goes through a bad phase and a bad period, they're grumpy, they're irritable, they're unpleasant, you're called to love them and forgive them, right? And so marriage is a lot of give and take, It's the good and the bad. It doesn't have to be good all the time. I've got really good friend. He had a lot to do with me coming into the Catholic Church. And it was years later, we were talking about marriage. And he goes, yeah, there was a 5-year period my wife and I hated each other. And every night we sat down, we prayed a rosary, we went to our separate rooms. Because we knew eventually God would show us what was wrong. And they've got a great marriage. But he just readily admits there were 5 years that they didn't enjoy each other's company much. But they recognized the commitment. They recognized that it wasn't God. He said deep down inside, he knew it wasn't her. And she'd say deep down inside, she knew it wasn't him. But it was the two of them. They just had lost their focus where it should be. A lot of it had to do with his career stuff and some things like that. But it's a long commitment, and you just don't back out of it.
And it's very easy to lose sight of each other if you don't remain God-centered. And so if the cross is not in the center of your marriage, sometimes other things come in and separate you. Not only separate you from each other, but it has the potential to separate you from God as well. So keeping God in the center is key to a healthy marriage and a sacramental marriage.
And again, it's that keeping that is your primary vocation. It's easy in today's world, both couples work. It's easy to get career-oriented in those things. And, well, I'm doing this for my family, but are you there for your family? Are you present for your family and those things? And then, along with being lifelong, it's exclusive and monogamous. And that's, an important element. It's not okay to get mad and step out. It's not okay to flirt. It's not, you are no longer yours. You're someone else's. You gave yourself away. And you gave yourself to that person as gift. And it's always important to remember that element of it.
Perhaps one of the, and we'll get to the slide in a minute, but perhaps one of the best examples we've experienced in the most recent time of faithful, of fully faithful, of pure faithful, is our daughter, and many of you know that she was married, and in the year of St. Joseph, she was married. Her husband was brought into the church.
Just right before the year of St. Joseph, he came in.
Yes, okay, and then they were married.
They were married before St. Joseph. He came in the church the year of St. Joseph.
Yeah, so then they were married, and then they had a baby. They had 2 other ones, but they had an infant, a baby. And then in August, pretty much on their anniversary, he came down with COVID. And then he ended up dying in October. And so through that whole journey, though, they were really doing it together. And our daughter just really hung in there with them. And they pulled together, and God was clearly the center of their relationship at that time. And nobody would expect that you would get married and then your spouse would die the following year. But it did happen to her. But she was faithful, and he was faithful to her. And so that is probably one of the best examples that we have seen recently that kind of very much illustrates what a faithful marriage is. My turn, okay. No, this is your slide. Yeah, you put this one in.
Put this in from your information. That's okay. So, when we look at fruitful, we look again to the life of Christ and his sacrifice and what he gives. And from that, we're getting ready to go into Lent, which we'll learn about tonight. But then we have the resurrection. And through the resurrection and the passion, we have the church. And we're all sitting here as part of the fruit of that complete gift Christ gave. He bore fruit. And marriages are to be fruitful. Primarily when we talk about it, we talk about life-giving. So that, you're to be open to the idea of children and life within the marriage. But there's other ways your marriage is fruitful. When you work together, when you cooperate with one another, and you share Christ's love together, that bears fruit for people. You share ministries, and sometimes sharing ministries, means you're doing environmental stuff, and I'm watching kids at home when we had little kids. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that sharing the ministry's backdoor support, right? But it's always working together and supporting one another in their walk with Christ. And then you start to have the fruit that comes from the union.
Like a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely not parasitic. If it becomes parasitical, then
we got a
or
problem.
parasitic, not parasitical. Honestly, my brain's dead. So we're watching the time. Yeah, instead of being parasitic, if it becomes parasitic, you're in trouble, right?
Right.
Because we all know, too, that a good parasite doesn't kill its host. So just remember that, right? A successful parasite. So I just have a question, though, Tom. This is all about being fruitful. And some people are unable to have children. And so what are some ways that marriage can still remain fruitful?
Well, there's lots of ways. There's service within the church. There's the example that they lead. There's nieces, there's nephews, and it's sharing Christ with the world as a couple. It's moving forward. It's being in support of one another, and that bears fruit. And, marriages in a funny way are a great example of good fruit and bad fruit, right? You can see healthy, happy marriages. I enjoy sitting behind a couple at church because you get to witness the love between them, right? There's something about that big arm coming around your shoulder and hugging you in the middle of Mass. Going, you're supposed to be listening to the priest. But you see that fruit, and it makes you say, wow, I want more of that in my relationship. And so it's that example, it's that togetherness, it's that, sometimes it's showing that you weather a storm together that bears fruit. That you don't let life knock you down when maybe other people would, when a crisis happens. So there are lots of ways that we bear fruit just through our life and moving other people. It's being together for other people. Sometimes it's just working in the church together. that what you were asking?
Yep, I think that's good.
So this was a last minute ad. If you could get to it, slide. Judy, do we have time or do we need to stop?
No, you have time, go.
Okay.
Well, that was a very fruitful
You got
conversation.
till 8 o'clock. You
Yeah.
still need to get to those things that go with marriage.
Which things that go with marriage?
We talked about last year, you and Father came up with a list.
We did that because Father was talking.
Yes. Yes, you did.
So
That was good.
So one of the things that, and we come out of all these different traditions sometimes, and there becomes this confusion that happens where we hear wives need to submit to their husbands. And it's kind of like text proofing. I'm going to pull out the text I like and talk about it. And John Paul II talked about it extensively in different areas. And he said, the first thing you have to read is subordinate to one another in reverence for Christ. And he points out that's a contradiction. You can't be subordinate. And so he said subordinate here means something else. And it's loving and respecting one another. And then he said, culturally we look at things different in America today. And so when we say the husband's the head, that seems to be putting the wife in a position of servitude instead of partnership. He said that's not at all what's intended. It's a working relationship. But what's interesting, if we look at Ephesians 5 where that takes place, anybody a student of law? Does anybody know what a condition precedent is? Condition precedent is a condition that has to exist before the other obligation kicks in. So it's a condition precedent. And they're always after the primary. It's weird the way things get written, right? Because when it says husbands submit, wives submit to your husband, there's a condition precedent, and it sits right underneath it. But for some reason, these underlined words don't get looked at. Because what's it tell the husband he's to do? Love her beyond. How much beyond herself? At the cost of his life, completely. Without reservation, right? It says the husband's job is to sanctify her, cleanse her, that he might present her to the church in splendor, without spot, wrinkle. She can be holy, without blemish. But he's to give his whole, everything he is, to his wife. Even his life, if that's what it takes, to preserve and protect and to serve. The important thing in his world, God, and then his wife. That submitting to one another then takes, John Paul would say, a very different look. Because, and I'll ask the ladies, if your husband, your boyfriend, the person you intend to marry is doing that, is cooperating and trusting them in their effort to do that easier, there's that duty of the husband to establish the trust. We love Christ because he first loved us. Because he gave himself. And that creates the fidelity we have for him, right? And so, John Paul points out that this passage goes on to compare the marriage and the relationship between Christ and the church. And then he says something, he points out what Paul says, and this is a great mystery. And he speaks of the church and Christ and the husband and the wife. And John Paul grabs hold of it. In here, where is it? The mystery of the relationship reveals the essential truth about marriage. That relationship between Christ and the church reveals some truth. But as we know, so often mysteries we just don't fully grasp, right? I understand. I can grapple with, I can say, okay, God's three. But I'll never be able to really understand the mystery of the Trinity, because eventually I'm going to go back to, well, what did it look like when it started? But then it didn't start, and now I don't understand it anymore, right? Because everything in my existence has an origin, and God's without origin. So it's just these mysteries that exist in the faith that we can't fully understand. But I think the important thing is that realization that what the Catholic Church doesn't teach is a subordinate servant relationship. Does that make sense? And we see that in other faiths, and we see it emphasized, different groups, different ways, but within the church, it's an absolute partnership. It starts with that first command, subordinate to one another. So if I tell you, take out the garbage, and you tell me?
I would say it's already done, because you didn't take it out.
And well, what if you tell me to take out the garbage?
Well, I hope you don't tell me to take it out.
But if I tell you to, and you tell me to, then we're going to have to do it together.
Right, yes, that's true.
And that's kind of what we, and that's that, to subordinate to one another, right? To do the first thing. But there is that ask for trust as the husband lives out his vocation. Does that make sense? Because it's a duty called on him that, you know, and it's something like when people are getting married, it's a big thing to think about, right? This is what God is calling me to. And that's fully. When we say fully, now we're back to fully, right? Faithful, fruitfully. There's just nothing left of you individually alone. You know, people, well, I want to get married, but I want to protect my individuality. I gotta be me, baby. So, are there questions about marriage? We didn't scare anybody off from it, right?
You're supposed to stay celibate until you're married, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah. The conjugal act belongs to the marriage and the marriage alone. I like that phrase, conjugal act. Makes me feel smart.
Makes it sound more important.
What does it mean?
We're not going to have that discussion here.
Not here.
Not here. We're not
Not
going to have that
here.
discussion.
Are there any other questions, thoughts, ideas?
What if you're married in the Catholic Church and your spouse becomes physically abusive and there's documentation and what do you do?
Probably what you're going to discover in that. The first thing you do is you move and protect yourself. You have a duty and a responsibility to move and protect
Or
yourself.
what if you want to divorce?
Well, probably what you're going to find out in investigating is if someone's abusive, there's probably in most cases a defect in fully, faithfully. Remember we talked about fully, you can't be a project, you have to be healthy, right? So you have circumstances, and that's why the annulment process exists. The church does everything it can through wedding prep to prepare people and try and weed that out. It's not a perfect system. Marriages happen a whole lot faster than ordination or religious life. Father, if you're going into religious life, you make your first vows when?
In a religious community,
Yes.
normally after 1 or 2 years of observership and novitiateship, temporary vows for 3 years.
What kind of vows?
Temporary vows
What does that
for
mean?
3 years, where you're temporarily under the vows. It's not a lifetime commitment yet, and then you have to renew those anywhere between 5 and 7 years, depending on the congregation. So usually it takes 8 to 10 years before you're fully ordained, or fully vow, lifetime vows.
And you decided to become a priest. It took, what, 8 months?
No.
How long was that discernment process?
For me, it was much longer, but for Dawson priesthood, about the quickest you could do it would be in 8 years. Although there is the seminary I went to for older vocations, there's a little bit of a loophole. You can do it in 5 years, but you have to already have significant life experience up to the age of 30 and go through screening.
So there's a loophole where you can do it in 5.
Yeah, if you're older, but if you're starting out, 8 years, 9 years.
And the church recognizes that difference because sometimes there's something in there that's broke, and that's what that annulment process is for. The presumption is that the marriage is sacramental. It's always the presumption that all marriages are sacramental. The truth is, and in today's culture, like the girl that Farrell worked with, it'll probably last 3 years. That's probably not a sacramental marriage. I was raised in a church with a pastor that had been divorced twice and was married again, and a youth minister that had been divorced and remarried. The tradition I was in didn't see marriage quite so permanent, you might say, right? So all of those things can factor into, and that's why the church really wants to make sure the couple coming in has as large an understanding as they can as to what it is to be a sacramental marriage, a marriage for life. And that's, again, we're back to that Christ-centered marriage, right? And so, that is, a horrible situation that does happen. It's a real reality in our culture with, abuse and things like that. Any other questions about marriage? Did we scare you off the marriage? Any other questions at all? Judy, any questions?
Not if they don't.
Did we miss anything?
I don't know, did you? No.
Just get up and talk.
I know you did. I got it. Trust me, I got it. Okay, Steve has a question, Tom.
Just a quick question. So the two become one flesh. Is that one flesh? Is that considered from God's point of view the same value as an individual's human life? The two individuals is the one flesh. Is it like the third part of the marriage? Is that considered in the same vein as an individual's life? The same magnitude? So that if a person destroys that marriage, either within the marriage or outside, does that carry the same gravity as somebody destroys an individual's life?
That's a great question. I mean, I can tell you, looking at what Jesus says, right? That the two become one, and let no man separate what God has brought together. That would be a grave and mortal, to interfere with the marriage would be a grave and mortal sin. And I get kind of, if you've entered mortal sin area, I'm I'm not sure, since you're going to have to confess it to clean it up anyways, mortal sin, what do you think, Father?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question.
He's saying the two become one. And if someone comes in and severs that, a third party severs that relationship, is that the same as taking a life?
The two become one flesh, isn't that a new life in itself?
Are you referring to the idea that the Trinity is formed through the love from God and Jesus?
If you are the cause of what severs this indivisible, but you got to remember that the parties within the marriage are also culpable, right?
Yeah, I think so. I can't think of any scriptural verse where that's called murder, but it's adultery. That's what it really is, adultery.
Which is still a mortal sin.
Right, and that's what I was saying. You know, you're in mortal sin, so you know I'm not sure I want to die with any of them and go, but I could have killed somebody.
It's the bond of marriage, covenant of the marriage.
Let's see how the microphone's going to agree with me. So I'm giving a kind of a quick guide to Lent and to all of the things that, especially for you, are meaningful and really in the RCIA that you may not know or maybe your first time to go through Lent. But Lent is a 40-day period plus 6 Sundays of preparation for Easter. That's one of the long-term goals of Lent, is to prepare for Easter. But it also is a time modeled after Christ's 40 days of temptation, fasting, and prayer in the desert. And so combining those, it's a time to be freed from any sins that have been harassing us, to grow spiritually, and to deny ourselves, and to take up the cross in the form of penance. And that has so many great effects that we can't really talk about all of them. But the way to do that, the church has given us, is very clear. And it's through fasting, prayer, and almsgiving. Throughout the whole year we pray, so that's nothing new. But we're asked to pray more intensely or to give more space to God. And to do that, we need to get rid of anything that would block it. And that's where fasting comes in. Fasting is eating less and drinking less. Okay? Now, if you take that as a metaphor, you can say, well, I'm going to fast from social media, or I'm going to fast from this and that. But fasting really is about eating and drinking food. And so you're only required to fast on 2 days of the year. That's Ash Wednesday, yesterday, and then Good Friday. Good Friday is 2 days before Easter Sunday, right? So you're going to come into the church on the Holy Saturday Vigil, and so you would be required to fast the day before that, Good Friday. But there's another thing called abstaining. Abstaining is when you do not eat a certain thing, and specifically meat. If you're between the ages of 14 and 59 in the church, you're required to abstain from meat every Friday of Lent. So tomorrow is a day to abstain. Okay. Now, the church is actually very generous in terms of fasting.
You can eat vegetables, though.
Yes. Okay. You can eat. You should just abstain from eating meat.
Okay.
And so you can eat fish, but that rule was established when giving up meat was a very big sacrifice. That was your main form of nutrition and protein. And so if you think to yourself, well, actually, I really like eating fish, and I love to eat, baked flounder and lobster and shrimp. If you were to go out and eat all of those things kind of excessively, that wouldn't be the spirit of abstaining from meat either. So you got to be wise about that. But from the experience of the church, especially for people who want to grow more and more in holiness, really you're recommended to fast all through Lent, not just on those days of obligation. And that means to eat less, or to eat in a way that is a little bit of a sacrifice. And here's a few examples. For fasting, you could eat one main meal a day and 2 smaller meals a day to keep up your energy level. Of course, you have to keep drinking water and stay hydrated through that whole thing because you will feel the weakness. You're not doing it to punish yourself. You're actually doing it to free yourself from anything that blocks you from having more time. And there's a real spiritual clarity and sobriety of mind that can come with fasting. Another way to fast is to do what's called intermittent fasting, where you choose a certain time of the day where you're going to eat and a certain time when you don't eat. So let's say you're going to eat from 7 in the morning until 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And you eat kind of normally, but then from 3 until the next morning, you don't eat any solid food. You can still have liquids or things like that. So those are some ways to approach fasting. And just a little story about fasting. Actually, I just remembered, there were actually 3 identical triplets, 3 brothers, and one of them lived in Dublin, Ireland, but the other 2 had moved away, one to Boston and the other to Sydney, Australia. Well, they had a tradition that every day at 3 p.m. Dublin time, the hour of mercy, they would go to the pub and order 3 draughts of Guinness. And they would get them all at once. And they knew exactly what their brothers, who were identical triplets, were thinking. So they would talk to them. Well, the whole bar got used to this routine in Dublin, and so one day in early March, one of the brothers who lived there showed up, and he said, "Just 2 drafts today," to the bartender, and there was a hush that fell over the bar. And the bartender slid the 2 drafts to him, and he said, "I'm so sorry for your loss." And he said, "Oh no, I've just given up drinking beer for Lent." But my other 2 brothers haven't. Sometimes we choose something that's very easy to give up. I'm going to give up sweetened chocolate, but I can still eat dark chocolate. Or I'm going to give up social media, but I'm going to binge on my favorite movies. That's not really fasting. Fasting is not just giving up something that's easy or that we think is going to be healthy, like a diet. That's good. That helps. But the real fasting is to change us spiritually. So we want whatever we choose to last for the whole time of Lent and afterwards. So when I'm fasting from food or I spend less time on social media, it's to make way for the Lord and to make space. And we want that to continue afterwards. So even if I go back to my regular schedule afterwards, I have been changed. I've prayed more. I've been more in contact with God during this time. So prayer, almsgiving, which is giving of our is a giving of our wealth to the poor as a real sacrifice, and prayer all go together. And the experience of the church is that prayer is greatly increased and made more effective through fasting and almsgiving. So yesterday we began Ash Wednesday. We began Lent with Ash Wednesday. Of course, we received the ashes on the forehead. Now, why do we do that? That's a very universal symbol, of course, ashes or dust, to remind us of death, that we will one day die and return to the earth. In Scripture, we read again and again that during times of mourning, that they put on sackcloth and ashes. Sackcloth is an uncomfortable fiber. It's kind of like, what's that? Burlap. It's like wearing a burlap sack. Well, wisely, I think the church didn't ask us to wear burlap sacks yesterday. But we were asked to put on ashes on our forehead and to remember our mortality. That it's only the gift of God, the breath of God, breathed into soil of earth that makes us alive. And without his breath, we again return to the clay, return to ashes. And so we do meditate on death during this time and our fragility, our weaknesses. Lent is a time of the cross, to look at the cross, Jesus crucified, and to give thanks for his death. so that when we celebrate his resurrection on Easter, we'll have experienced that death in ourselves and participated in it. And so don't be afraid to look death in the face during these 40 days and to remember, yes, I will die. I will die. Not just people die, but I myself will die. And how can I prepare for that? Just by doing what the church always asks us to do, but in a more intense way, to give ourselves over to Jesus and to make way for prayer, and to, as much as possible, throw the sin out of our lives. So you're on this Lenten journey, which this Sunday is coming to a very important Saturday, the Vigil Mass, first of all, the rite of enrollment, where Father Irwin will receive your names, the rite of enrollment, and then the rite of election this Sunday at the Cathedral at 6. So the RCIA process really kind of increases in terms of its pace and commitment during this time of Lent. You'll also have the scrutinies on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Sunday. The scrutinies are really a form of prayer for you to look at yourself and to say, yes, I'm ready to take this next step, and I ask for the prayers of the church to help me. It's kind of like have you been to a baptism, maybe? You renew your baptismal vows. And in those renewal of your baptismal vows, you remember that you have renounced Satan and that you say yes to God. So this scrutiny strengthens those commitments to renounce sin and to grow in virtue. Now we talk about sacrifice in Lent. Sacrifice means to set something aside to make it holy, just like the Mass is a sacrifice. Why is it a sacrifice? It's a sacrifice because we set aside the bread and the wine to become the body and blood of Christ. He had the one sacrifice on the cross, which was the bloody sacrifice. We offer a non-bloody sacrifice. And we also sacrifice in any way when you take part of yourself and set it aside for God and offer it to God, that's a sacrifice. And so the question is to ask God tonight and to pray about it. What does God want you to sacrifice during this time? Because this Lent will never come again. We'll never get another chance to grow in holiness today. And we want to make a firm commitment and ask the Holy Spirit to inspire us about what that means. But you don't want to take on anything that is too excessive or that hurts you. This is not about inflicting pain on yourself. So if you have any doubts or any questions, please speak to a spiritual advisor or speak to me about what's an appropriate sacrifice. Because again, we will experience, like if we're fasting, we'll experience weakness, we'll be tired, but we're never doing it to punish ourselves. Right? It's always to grow in the love of God, and if you find that whatever you're doing is too severe, then take a break from it and talk to someone. Stations of the Cross is a great practice we have. How many people have been to a Stations of the Cross? Stations of the Cross. All right. So tomorrow on Fridays during Lent, we'll have Stations of the Cross. It was announced, I'm pretty sure we're going to have it in the church. I think they announced that it was in the chapel at one of the masses, but it's not in the chapel, it's in the church. It used to be in the chapel, and I think during COVID tide and with the numbers growing that it's been moved to the church. But after the Stations of the Cross, the Lenten meal will be here, so a little traveling. The Stations of the Cross, also called the Via Dolorosa, or the Way of Sorrow, retraces the steps of the, also in the Sorrowful Mysteries, but from the agony in the garden where Jesus is arrested up until the crucifixion and the laying in the tomb, we retrace those step by step. I believe there's 14 stations. And at each one, we will say a prayer like giving our thanks for the cross, and there will be a scriptural verse. And it's a chance to grow in our journey with Christ and realize all the steps he takes scripturally that led to his death. And so it's a very powerful community prayer, and I encourage everyone to be there tomorrow if you can. I don't have the exact times memorized, but they're on the
sheet. That
they're on the
we
sheet.
can look at.
What time is it? The English?
In English, it's at 6:30, and in Spanish, it's at 7:15.
In English, it is at 6:30, and in Spanish, it's at 7:15. To everyone listening out there, if this is live, it's 6:30 and 7:15, and the Lenten meal will be served after or between those.
Between 7 and 8.
Between 7 and 8.
Here, in this room.
So those are some of the Lenten practices that are most to be aware of. Anybody, how many people went to Ash Wednesday and received the ashes? Okay, was that a first time for some people? Yeah, and so it's Ash Wednesday in many places is the most attended service of the entire year, even more than Easter and Christmas, because we really love to see a public sign and for everybody to receive that. And I look at you and I think, wow, I can see those ashes on your forehead. I'm seeing you as a different person. I'm seeing you without God as dead, but with God having eternal life. And so we're not afraid of death. We're not afraid of the cross, because on the outward it looks like death, but it is actually the victory over death. With Christ, death becomes eternal life. That's why any sacrifice or fasting, almsgiving, or prayer, anything we do this Lent, it feels like we're giving up. It feels like we're losing ourselves, but we're not. We're having a conversion of heart, and we're actually doing what the Scripture says. It says that whoever loses his life for my sake will save it, right? But whoever saves their life for their own sake will lose it. And so that's the mystery that we're growing into. And finally, another point is that other than Ash Wednesday and Station of the Cross, but especially the Holy Triduum begins on after Holy Thursday, which is when we celebrate the last day of Lent and the institution of the Eucharist, the washing of the feet of the disciples. Then we have Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and Easter Sunday, the Holy Triduum. That's really the next time that we see this big public display announcing that we're in a different season. Most of Lent is carried on in the secret of our heart and on our own practices. So we really, with God, can determine the level of commitment we have and pray in secret. That's why Scripture says, even when we're fasting, to wash our face, to anoint our head, to dress well, to even be more joyful, not gloomy, but to be joyful, and to let our sacrifice be a secret sacrifice that only God the Father knows, so that we can be rewarded in secret. So that's mainly what I would have to cover today. On the sheet that you have, there's some other creative suggestions about ways to make more time. And Lent also is a little bit more of a time of silence and simplicity. You'll notice in the Mass there'll be less music, less instrumental music especially. It'll be mostly vocal. There's no flowers at the altar. We don't use incense. And so everything is kind of restrained and subdued to get into that. And we want to do the same thing at home and in our life. Less chatter, less gossip, less distractions, making room for more of something, more time with God, more time with each other, and more genuine human relationships. And so this is a great time to do that, to spend at least some time in silence every day, to turn the phone off, and to give yourself the okay that the world's not going to end if you don't look at the phone for that hour. Give yourself that disconnection for an hour and connect with God. Now, on the one sheet, you might find it at the bottom of it has another idea to begin an online Lenten devotion series. I found one recently I really like. It's an app simply called Amen. Amen is by the Augustine Institute. And in the readings, they have a reading of readings by John Henry Newman. And they're very, like 8 to 9 minute kind of podcast readings. So there's lots of options there. Forum.org, EWTN, Bishop Robert Barron, or like I said, the Amen app. The Amen app also has meditations and like bedtime kind of, they're not bedtime stories, but they're bedtime meditations with, and the readers, I tell you what, they're really good at putting you to sleep. But you get to hear some prayers right before it. But the other readers are more exciting that are meant for the daytime meditation. So, especially for anyone who's entering the Lent or experience Ash Wednesday for your first time, if you have any thoughts or any questions, I'd love to hear it, and then I'm going to turn it over to Judy. So we'll just spend like 3 minutes if you have questions, comments. Yes?
What about meat on Friday? It's sort of related to Friday during Lent. Is that requirement the same throughout the rest of the year with an exception of substitution?
Okay. So the question is what about meat on Friday? We know that during Lent we should abstain from meat on Friday. What about the rest of the year? Do we abstain from meat on Friday for the rest of the year? You are not required to abstain from meat on Friday outside of Lent. I can't think of any exceptions that are required on Fridays, but many Catholics do choose not to eat meat on Fridays outside of Lent to carry that spirit. And that's what I was, talking about before, that the good practices you start in Lent maybe will continue either literally in that way, or at least the spiritual fruits of them will continue. So at least on Tuesdays and Fridays, which are penitential days in the church, sometimes Wednesday and Friday, depending on your tradition. Tuesday and Friday we pray the sorrowful mysteries on the rosary. And so for many people that is a penitential day, and they might abstain from meat or eat less, or do another penitential act on Tuesdays and Fridays. So yeah, it's always good to look down the road and say, this day of the week I'm going to have kind of like a spiritual day, a desert day. I'm going to have some silent time. I'm going to maybe do some fasting and prayer and give that time to the Lord. You are supposed to fast an hour before communion too.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
You can drink water though.
Right. No coffee.
How thin is it?
I like it strong.
No Coke.
No Coke.